It's RSA Conference 2021. This week, in our first segment, we welcome John Masserini, Global Chief Information Security Officer at Millicom Telecom International, to discuss identity management as a foundation for future-proofing your security. In the Enterprise News segment, we discuss all the news from RSA Conference 2021. Lots of stories. In our final segment, we welcome Mark Bowling, Vice President of Security Response Services at ExtraHop, to discuss building a response strategy to advanced threats. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Here's Jacob. He's uploading documents to the cloud and chatting notes to his outside agency partners. This is Zoe. She's rushing to share the customer list with marketing and is sending the latest product roadmap to her mobile device. Which one of them is creating insider risk? They both are. Everyone creates insider risk, sometimes with malicious intent and sometimes just by doing their jobs. Empower productivity and protect your data with Code 42 Insider. Visit securityweekly.com/Code 42 to learn more. Hey IT and security pros, if you remember one thing from today's episode, it should be to check out the leading cloud directory platform, JumpCloud. JumpCloud's directory platform makes it easier to solve today's IT challenges by unifying device and user management through a single pane of glass. With JumpCloud securely managing your users and their devices, doing common things like onboarding and offboarding remote workers is easy. Try JumpCloud for free today at securityweekly.com/JumpCloud and help your organization move to a modern, secure hybrid work model. We all know that cybercriminals have the upper hand, and the most advanced ones have already made it past your defenses. When advanced threats like SolarWinds Sunburst compromise your business, you need a strategy. Tune into ExtraHop's session, Building a CISO Response Strategy to Advanced Threats, at RSA Conference on May 19th to learn strategies to build resilience against advanced threats. Find session details and learn more about ExtraHop's presence at the 2021 RSA Conference at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop-RSAC.
Welcome to episode number 228 of Enterprise Security Weekly for May 19th, 2021. I am your host, Matt Alderman, sitting in for Paul Asadorian. So figure this out. I come to studio and I sit in for Paul. Anyways, joining me are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Adrian Sanabria. Welcome, Adrian.
Hey, thank you. Glad we're mixing it up tonight. It's good to be on the show with you and Mr. Jeff Mann.
Yes, and our second co-host sitting in for Tyler Shields, because it's RSA Conference, is my second co-host, Mr. Jeff Mann.
Well, thanks for clearing that up, Matt. I thought I was sitting in for Paul, and then when you said you were sitting in for Paul, I thought that meant I was sitting in for you. So I don't know which ends up, but what show are we doing?
We're
Enterprise.
Doing
right?
Enterprise Security Weekly,
Okay.
Yes.
I'm on board. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Security Weekly is excited to announce that we will be at InfoSec World 2021 in person. Yes, I said in person. October 25th to 27th, 2021. This year, our annual partnership with InfoSec World is a little extra special as we are both business units under the Cyber Risk Alliance brand. What does that mean for Security Weekly listeners and InfoSec World attendees? You will get to see and hear from many of the Security Weekly team at the event, and we'll save 20% off your World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register using our discount code. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher, our YouTube channel, sign up for a mailing list, join our Discord server, and follow us on our newest live streaming platform, Twitch. John Masserini is a 25-year veteran of providing information and corporate security services to multinational Fortune 1000 companies. An industry-recognized leader whose expertise across multiple business verticals provides for a unique approach to delivering an information risk program that drives business-focused solutions to today's global information security and compliance challenges. As the Global Chief Information Security Officer of Millicom Telecom International, John is responsible for all aspects of the global information security program, including security operations, engineering, architecture, vulnerability and risk management, and business continuity planning. John, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Hey, Matt. Well, very nice to be here.
I asked you to come on to the show around the concept of why identity is the foundation of the security platform. And I want to frame this for the audience a little bit. This audience knows I am a big fan of what I consider the three core pillars of the future information security program: application, identity, and data. And we talk a lot about application security because we have a show dedicated to AppSec. We talk data security at times. I'm waiting for some more innovation there. But identity is one of those areas that I think people forget about its core importance into the overall security program. And I want to talk about this concept of using identity as the foundation, because you notice I didn't say the network is the foundation or the endpoint's the foundation. I said the identity is the foundation. So let's start with a little kind of overview on your strategic thinking around why identity.
Sure. So, for years, we've talked about the dissolving perimeter, right? That we have to do something that is going to kind of help us protect the data, but yet still enable our end users to do their jobs. When I kind of conceptually still look at that and look at where we are with, between cloud services and microsegmentation and all of the other new, hot latest buzzword solutions, it all comes down to really managing that identity, right? And understanding which of my users is accessing what for what reason. And, it's really kind of important. I don't look at identity as a factor of my strategy. It's kind of the strategy, right? It really is. That's where we're going. We want to get to a point where, I was having a discussion today with someone trying to explain, the Facebook model. We come home and, no matter what you want to do online, you can log in with Facebook. You click the little button, you're in, and, everybody's happy. Facebook obviously loves it. You log in, it's easy. You don't have to remember passwords or anything. But yet when we get into the enterprise, that's a foreign concept. So, really driving to the point where I really want to be able to have that level of understanding of my users, not just to secure the infrastructure and secure the data, but really to provide a seamless experience for my users.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, when you go to web pages and you want to log in, you're like, I can log in as using Facebook. I could log in using Google, right? I could use my Google account. Not everybody has one, but a lot of people do. And so that's a convenience we have on the consumer side, but not necessarily that same level on the corporate side.
Yeah, and that's look, at the end of the day, nobody hates passwords more than security professionals, right? They offer an incredibly limited level of security, but that's also all we really have, right? So we're kind of in this quandary of wanting to make life easier and wanting to really, let my board sleep at night, but we're stuck with this archaic control that everybody relies on and is kind of built into every system. So how do we add that layer onto it and really bring that consumer experience in, and not just make it easier for everyone, but significantly ramp up the security and risk mitigation program and practices of our infrastructures. And that's really where I think that's the foundation that we're building, and that's really the direction I think the whole industry needs to move to. Especially when you start looking at some of these super young startups, these the biometrics and a lot of these kind of new cutting edge. We can log in, we can tell you who you are by the way you type, right? Kind of scary, but also really sexy and really something that I want to be able to leverage in the future.
Yeah, so let's think about that for a second. I mean, when you think about identity, and we track this space, and so identity is identity and access management solutions. It's single sign-on solutions. It's multi-factor authentication solutions. It's privileged access. It might be some adaptive auth solutions. So lots of different components, not really consolidated today. We're seeing a little bit of consolidation in the space, but still not to the level. You're going to have to implement multiple solutions to really leverage all these aspects of identity. So how do you approach this when you think about how do I build out from a strategic, but also from a product deployment perspective? What do you look at? What do you evaluate to decide how I'm going to bring all these pieces together in a unified way so it's not kind of all over the place?
Yeah, and that's, honestly, when you look at the struggles that, a general identity management program has, it's really around the integration aspects, right? I have cutting edge applications that, my digital team is developing right now, and I have decades old mainframes, right? And everything in between. So how do I tie all this together? And it really is depending upon the layers that when we look at this kind of stuff, where do we have to plug the holes, right? When we plug the gaps. When we look at products, we have requirements, right? They have to be SAML based. They have to support SCIM, depending upon what they're doing. Things like OpenID really kind of drive it. And because that's our challenge, right? Our challenge is, I don't know if anyone, if has tried this, but set up a SAML-based authentication in your infrastructure, right? Try to do certificate-based authentication or set up an identity provider or something like that. It's a nightmare. And God forbid one of those certificates expire and you don't expect it. Now, half your people can't log in. And it's not easy. It's quite cumbersome to build that in the infrastructure. So when we look at solutions, especially around identity, right? I want my PAM solution to plug right into my identity provider, right? There shouldn't be a integration effort. There shouldn't be this massive amount of custom code. It should plug and play. Whether it's my PAM solution, whether it's my MFA multi-factor solution, or even some cutting edge tool that we're using on the endpoints that allow people to authenticate with their NFC on their phone. Whatever it is, the identity warehouse and what we, the way we look at our identity program is really building that single point of authorization and authentication to allow all of the others to leverage it, right? And late last year, there's some work in the open source community being done called FastFed that really has kind of opened up a lot of that, right? It really allows us to deploy, code, really quick code, all based on Node.js, and really kind of just push it out. It does certificate renewals, it does management, and it's really kind of, I think, one of the linchpins to building that integration between all those products.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point, is that identity is not just the human. We've got a lot of service accounts now. We got a lot of different, with the certificates. Identity is expanding beyond just a user logging in. It could be a service or a machine or something else logging in, which only adds to the complexity of how you build a really robust integrated system. Yeah,
and one of the obviously buzzwords of the last year or two are robots, right? So we have them. Most operations probably do have them, even though they might not know it. And there's a lot of that autonomous kind of work being done that, from a user behavior analytics side, might look like a user. So how do we manage this autonomon where it's doing a lot of great work, but at the same time, should that account get subverted or taken over, it could do a lot of damage, right? So how do we manage that? How do we make sure that a developer isn't embedding code in there and the credentials rotate on a regular basis? And how do we plug all that together without needing a staff of dozens of people? Is really that's kind of where we're thinking right now, right? How do we address these challenges? Because at the end of the day, the perimeter is gone, right? When we look at things, especially over the last year, I can't assume people are in my offices. I have offices all over the world and throughout LATAM. I can't assume someone's coming into our network to work, but I have to keep them productive. So how do we do that, right? How can I trust the machine, put a risk ranking on it, right? I trust the machine a certain amount. Oh, they've authenticated. I trust them a certain amount. They've authenticated with MFA. Okay, now they can do that transaction. All of that, it really does tie in, but the challenge being they're all separate solutions and there's separate decisioning processes. So bringing them together is kind of that's where we're trying to get to.
So if I can jump in, Matt, may I?
Yes, sir.
What intrigued me from reading the description of what we wanted to talk about today, and you just alluded to portions of it, the perimeter is dissolving. How do we protect our data today? We actually had a conversation last week. I think it was on the news segment of Paul's Security Weekly, episode 694, and the little voice in my head will tell me if I was wrong, where we were talking about how effectively classical notions of network security are kind of going away, dissolving, because the network is kind of doesn't exist the way we used to think of it as existing, is within physical walls, and we needed to protect it from the internet. So, and that's what I kind of was picking up on in terms of, okay, how does identity management or an identity strategy fit into security? Because and I'm going to get a little philosophical on you for a second. It is and it isn't. So I guess my first question is, and I'm going to fire off several of them at you. What exactly is the definition of identity? Part B to that is it synonymous with authentication? Are we saying the same thing, or is there a subtle difference? And then to build on that, compare and contrast the difference between authentication and authorization. I'm a stickler for defining terms and making sure that we're all on the same page, because we've thrown a lot of terminology out in a couple minutes, and I think I know what you mean, but that doesn't necessarily mean I think it means the same thing, or Matt thinks it means the same thing, or even Adrian means the same thing. So what is identity? What are we talking about specifically? How does it relate to authentication? And then how do both of them relate to authorization? And let's pause there and let you respond.
Yeah, so I look at identity as the actor. Now, that actor could be a person. It could be a robot. In some cases, it could be an actual hardware device. But I look at the identity as something that will perform an action that I can associate a risk level to it. So, when I look at the model that we've built, it really is around what are you? Who are you? Right. So whether you're John checking his email, the robot trying to figure out if someone's payment was done on time or not, or maybe my CEO checking their email from the plane. Mm-hmm. They're very different levels of risk that we have to understand, right? So how they authenticate is kind of completely separate from the who and the what is actually performing the action. So we have this kind of abstract idea of identity where it's not a person necessarily, right? I don't point to, I hate the word user when we think about identity, right? Because it's not a user. To me, it's this abstract concept of something I can assign a risk level to and make decisions based upon the actions you're trying to execute.
I mean, it almost sounds like you could define or describe identity as person, place, or thing, like a noun. You alluded to we're no longer in the office you sort of implied that there's some sort of trust associated with devices and certain things that you at least used to know that they were on the trusted network, and so you could trust them. That seems to be what you're getting. So really, it's almost a person, place, or thing. So identity is a noun. Keep going.
So identity actually quite true. It is a noun. It is it is absolutely, it's a person, place, or thing that I can say, look, I trust you a lot, or maybe you're too new, right? Maybe I don't know where you're coming from, so you're going to get kind of limited access. You're going to get that risk assigned to you that we can then do something with in the future.
Okay.
And to add on to what Jeff is saying, or to continue this theme of clarifying terms, when you say robot, we're not talking about the kind that fall face first into fountains at shopping malls, right? We're talking about, like when you give, I don't know, maybe some kind of email platform. There's a lot of these email platforms that help you manage your mail. You can give them access, like a basically some kind of key to your G Suite or to Office 365, and they can help clear out some of that mail for you, or like an if this then that or Zapier type of use case. I'm assuming when you're talking about robots, you're talking about like process automation, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It's all process automation, especially it's really taken off in the financial world. So there's a lot of process automation around the accounts payable, accounts receivable. We actually use it a lot in our fraud department, and it really does. It goes, basically, and I don't want to use the ML or AI, but it's really kind of an autonomous process that emulates a lot of ways, simulates how humans will kind of review payment activity, just general user activity or customer activity, to ensure there's no fraud going on, or to ensure that payments are processed correctly. So it really is, for lack of a better explanation, kind of SOAR for the financial world. But that's really what it is. But all of these processes have their own identities, right? So and quite frankly, by design, that happens. So we don't want someone logging into our financial platform with one user ID and 12 different process automation scripts run. It's, we have a 1-for-1, so I know exactly this process ran, this process logged in, this process completed, right? So that's very much what it's about, but it's also becoming it quite big, right? We're getting a lot of these because people are appreciating the value they bring, the speed at which the automation happens, and there's really a tremendous amount of value when these things really get built out and integrated into an environment. They're very beneficial, but it's really around. It's very transactional based.
Yeah,
and I don't think it was ever proved, but a great example, that I remember, thinking a lot about was Unroll.me, which was a service where you could give them access to your Gmail and they would unsubscribe you from all the crap that you've collected over the years, or maybe stuff that you never even subscribed to but started showing up in your inbox. Go through all your mail, look for those unsubscribe links, and try to unsubscribe you. And then a story came out that they had sold that access to Uber, so Uber could search through like millions of people's Gmail boxes to see when they signed up for Lyft. So because they wanted that data, they wanted some idea of when someone signed up for their competitors' services. And I think that kind of highlighted, I don't know if that was ever proven or not, I should say that, but that kind of highlighted like the kind of abuse, or at least the way we need to think about how, giving some of these third-party vendors access to such critical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, most of those were personal inboxes, but the way G Suite works, some of those could have been corporate mail inboxes as well.
And I think that ties into the second part of Jeff's question, which was around aspects of authorization and access, right? Because, okay, we know what authentication is, password. But it's authorization and access are kind of those next two steps in the AAA. What we used to call it way back in the day. The term morph, but to Jeff's point, there's identity authorization or authentication, authorization, and access. And I think that's the authorization access component. So we have to start thinking about is, are you authorized to access certain things? And then at what privilege levels?
I think the struggle is, Matt, that we're overlapping terms. I think fundamentally, what we're talking about is authorization and authentication. And apologies, I'm an aged ex-DoD spook type of guy, where I was doing encryption and cryptography 35 years ago in the office.
Jeff is quoting from Orange Book.
So I was going to say, I still have the full Rainbow series on my bookshelf. So
yeah,
why
Orange Book quotes?
Other than its sentimental value,
it's pretty.
It's pretty. It's sentimental.
But the first thought I had in the description, where you talked about how do we protect our data? Traditionally, classically, when it comes to data security, we're talking about the triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So my first sort of question is, well, how is identity strategies, whatever we're talking about, impact data in terms of confidentiality, integrity, or availability? Which of those three, which combination of those three, or is there something else? Because in our digital age, I would argue that there is more than just the three anymore. But authorization and authentication, Matt, I think it boils down to identifying who you are, person, place, or thing. So, okay, I know who you are. That's the authentication. And then the authorization is, okay, what are you allowed to do? What can I give you? What can I share with you? What can I allow you to have access to? That to me is the somewhat maybe simplistic definition of authorization versus authentication. And I think everything else we're talking about is just synonyms and buzzwords around that. But I think those are the two fundamental issues that we're trying to address. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, and it's not just, who are you and what are you allowed to do, but what are you allowed to do at this given point in time, right? So yeah. just because it's 11 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday morning doesn't necessarily mean I should trust the transaction you're doing is legitimate. Because if you typically do it from, say, Miami, and now you're doing it from, somewhere in Europe, well, I gotta wonder about that, right? Why were you logged in an hour ago in New York City, and right now you're in Korea? That continual authorization or authentication and authorization process is, I think, how it all ties together, right? It's not just about getting rid of the password. It's really about mitigating the risk. And if I look at the applications that we're building today, and a lot of the application attacks that we see are, hey, I'm able to convince the application, the endpoint, the device, whatever, this one time I authenticate, right? So it doesn't matter what happens once I convince that end system that I am a person. Everything else is, I can do everything else I want, instead of doing it, transaction by transaction, and continually validating that I should be doing what I'm doing. I should be doing it at the appropriate, within the appropriate bounds, and that I don't stray, right? So the risk mitigation factors around identity and what it opens up to us when it comes to really controlling what happens with the confidentiality of the data, right? So just because, the perfect example, I log in, and just because I can see the data doesn't mean I should be able to download the data, right? Or maybe I can, but because I'm accessing the data from my personal device rather than a corporate device, I can't. So that's the kind of dynamic and real-time decisioning that, I hope we get to sooner rather than later, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I think it's this time, you said it, do you have access at that time? And this is where the privileged access management vendors start to come into the equation, right? Should I have administrative privileges? And if I have them, should I have them forever? Or should I have them for a limited period of time, right? Because maybe I'm using my personal account, which is bad, to do administrative tasks. You don't want to leave those admin functions necessarily available forever, because if I get compromised as a user, guess what? They have full reign on the admin side.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's...
I was just going to share an anecdote. Yeah, I remember the first time somebody, suggested to me that, sysadmin didn't need access to the data in the database. The DBA probably does, but maybe not the system administrator. So you got somebody managing the OS, and the database sits on that OS. And I think before that moment, I don't remember where in my career that light bulb went off. I just assumed that everything was hereditary, that you automatically got the privileges of everything above. And yeah, it's just not the case. A sysadmin, in most cases, doesn't need access to the data stored within the database on the Solaris or AIX or Linux server that it's running on.
Right. But that's quite the challenge to implement, across an enterprise. Right.
Yeah.
And so to the point about the...
Well, and frankly, I'm sorry, the challenge more often than not is not the technological automated controls. It's the use case, the business case for that group, that office, that team, that individual. What do they really need to see? And I am throwing down a PCI moment for you, Matt, so drink up. We've always done it that way. We've always looked at the full card number, and we've used that as the keyword search to find the right transaction that somebody's disputing or we're trying to do a refund, and training people to there's more than one way to look up a transaction. You don't have to have the full pan there. So I know this is probably beyond what you're going for, but there's a process involved in just trying to figure out the validity of what people think that they need to have access to, in addition to when and how often and where and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And quite honestly, it most times admins take care of multiple systems, right? So my access on one system as an admin might not need access to the data on another system. I might, or it might be irrelevant, right? The question might be irrelevant. So, sure. how you operationalize that and really kind of roll something out throughout a large enterprise it's enormous. It's quite scary, to be honest with you. And that's to the point. We have to get our privileged access partners to be able to kind of elevate to that status and give us that capability and that functionality. And I know there's a lot of roadmaps out there that say they are. But tying that, again, just because I can right now doesn't mean I should, for instance, during a production day. Maybe I don't need that access during a production day. Maybe I do need that access at night when I have to do patching or whatever. And that's the complexity of the world.
So, John, I'm curious, in your environment, we know that CISOs have roughly 68 different security products on average. Can you give us an idea of how many different identity vendors you're using today to kind of solve this identity challenge? Is it a few, or is it still dozens? I'm just curious.
It's not dozens. We have taken in. We've had a project. We started a project about a year and a half ago to roll out a single identity warehouse. We have standardized on that across the entire environment. We have standardized on a singular privileged access management solution. Now, we have the Microsofts, right? We have our multi-factor vendors. We have a single sign-on, although we're probably going to find a better solution in the coming years. So we are in the process of getting rid of a lot of the distributed identity access providers, and really kind of centralizing on the single identity warehouse, because that's critical. That's the foundation of where we're going, right? I can't have 4 different PAM solutions or identity management warehouses, or stores across my enterprise and hope to manage access. It's illogical to get there. So, we're really pushing on, a single warehouse, as limited providers as we can. Any new providers have to be, open protocol based. So, whatever, if we have an instance, and quite honestly, we're looking at endpoint vendors right now that, make that experience a lot better, right, for our users, whether it's biometrics, whether it's, NFC on the phone or whatever it is. But the requirement is, SAML, SCIM, whatever open solution is out there that they would plug into, they have to support that. And if they come in and say, no, we're kind of closed, we do all this kind of stuff, then you're eliminated from consideration pretty quick.
Yeah, I think consolidation and simplification is where the CISOs want these types of solutions to be. And that's why I asked the questions, because we've heard a lot of that in the conversations that we've had with other CISOs, is they want to figure out how to take that universe of vendors and skinny it down so they don't have as much integration to do on their own. And identity is definitely a place where some of that consolidation could happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okta's working on it.
Yeah, there's a few vendors working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you for having me. It was quite a pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation.
That's awesome. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the enterprise security news for this week.